Next up, we have Ralph Weber of Nominum. Ralph.
Okay, so DNS seems to be a good tool for any sort of attacker. That's why we now the second talk of kind of the abuse of DNS for something. And I'm going to talk about DNS amplification attacks. And this is actually not a news thing. I mean, we've had some talks at NANOG 56, and there was some work done on how we could defend from these, mainly from authoritative servers. And resource rate limiting has been implemented now by pretty much most of the major software vendors. Our version came out last week. So that's sort of a done deal, and I think from speaking to people here that the large attacks on the authoritative, while there are still attacks, they are probably not to that level that they have been. So the DNS amplification was used for the largest OTDs at all, and the open resolvers have been a problem, and providers worldwide see attacks on these resolvers. So just a quick introduction on how it works. Basically, the attack relies on the fact that you can spoof the IP address. You use UDP because there's no kind of whatever connection set up, so you don't care. And you have a small packet, and then that generates a large answer. And most of the stuff that people were using and are still using are any queries, which is give me every record set that you have for that name. And especially at kind of the top of the zone, these are usually large records. Sorry. And when you look at that, how it looks, if you are doing that with a DIG, you basically, in that case, I used ISDORG because that's one of the things that has been used. And you receive something like 3K records for a query that is 50 byte or something like that. And if you then do the math for that, you can generate, with a relatively low, say, of home connection, a relatively large amount of traffic, and you can pretty much fill up a gig pipe by using a few home connections. And a botnet that just requires a couple of, well, say 20 or 30 people are actually using these queries. It's pretty easy to get and also pretty cheap to rent probably. And if you have a few thousand of these connections, you see the attacks that we saw with Spamhaus. And these attacks, as I said, are not new, but they are ongoing, and they are also changing a bit. So as I said, the initial stuff was mainly focused on authoritative servers, and resource rate limiting, now that it's deployed by lots of people, kind of make that go away, because the attacker, I mean, if I don't have a kind of simple target I can use, I'm going to choose the next target that is simple to use, and some of this other work is there then shifts the focus from the authoritative to the open resolvers. And I talked with a couple of ISPs who said, well, we have open resolvers because we don't know the IP address and what have you. And then they've gotten these attacks, and then they, well, were a bit more open to kind of limiting the access to their resolver to only allow them for their customers. And so these then led to ISPs with having the resolvers locked down to their own customers, so everything was good, and they were still seeing the attacks. So what is actually happening? A lot of the open resolvers we see out there are actually not open resolvers at all. They have no idea how to resolve. They don't traverse to the router or what have you. What they do is they simply DNS proxy, and that's how it looks. So the attack that we see at lots of ISPs at the moment are utilizing mostly broken gateways or wrong setup home gateway boxes or wrong setup DNS servers on the internet. And they use that by simply spoofing a packet. The attacker spoofs the packet and then sends that to the home gateway. And the home gateway then proxies that. So it gets the queries, puts it in its IP address in and sends it to the ISP resolvers. And the ISP resolver, it's a customer of mine, I have to answer it. So answer sends the packet back to the home gateway. The home gateway says, okay, I got this, I'm going to send it back to my client, which is the victim. And the victim then kind of gets overwhelmed with traffic. So how did we figure that out? As I said, we had kind of lots of reports from our customers that had that problem. And we then looked at other stuff, and we found the Open Resolver project, which is a real good site that keeps track of these things. And they recently kind of tried to fingerprint or send the chaos query that identifies the name server, and they, well, then produced a report on which software versions were used, and we found out something like nearly 500,000 Ventures resolvers. So we sell our software, and it's not cheap. And I was a bit surprised because either someone's stealing our software, or if we have really sold that much, what I'm doing here, not lying on a beach in Hawaii. I mean, so something must be going on. So we tried to figure out what was going on. And as said, customers restricted the access, so there must be something else. So I set up a simple experiment with some of the resolvers and created a domain that didn't have anything in it, but had one name service that I can then actually look at the traffic coming in. So I sent a unique query for an IP, that's just an example there, and then I looked at the traffic on the name server and found out, well, the IP address that I'm receiving, which in that case is the client address, is not the IP address of the actual open resolver. And the reason is because it's one of these open proxies. And this was the way how attacker used it. And they also kind of switched the attacks from, initially it was kind of all, because they were coming from the authoritative side. And on the authoritative side, the interesting targets are, well, the people who deploy or may deploy DNSSEC and have large record sets. But as soon as they switched the attacks, they kind of got into other addresses because these names were known to be used in attacks. So they set up sort of their special records. And they just did a query. So they didn't care about the DNSSEC, they just cared about the amplification. And what we also found there, and we also, some of the example we'll see later, there were some people who might have a bit problematic understanding of DNS when setting up records and zones. Something like, even if kind of MX or A records for mail exchanges might be a good thing to have more than one, maybe 250 is not a good number to have. And we've seen lots of this stuff. So, and the advantage of this approach is obviously the ISP resolver are a great resource. They are, I mean, ISPs try to scale their resolvers so they can serve their customer base, and they're pretty nifty and can be heavily loaded, so it was good to use these resources. And with that, all the kind of stuff we had so far, which was RL and stuff like that, didn't help. So we had to look at something else to how can we defend them. And I mean, obviously, the best way would be to upgrade the home gateway. Well, it's not going to happen as well as BCP38, probably not going to happen. So we have to find something else that may work. And what we said, well, with our service, we have the ability to basically live look into the traffic that's coming in and do some kind of analysis on this in nearly real time. So we thought, well, we look at that and can then maybe find out some familiarity, and we can basically look, what are the queries, what are people doing that, what are the query types are used, and we then basically try to detect this stuff. And with that, I'm going to now go away from the presentation and try to do this because we have, let me see if I can trigger the mouse. Where's my mouse? There it is. Okay, I'm going to just expand that a bit. So this is one of a server that I've set up and that is an open resolver at the moment, the internet. And what I'm going to try now, I'm going to ask it for the top domains that it has been asked in the last hour that have a response size, so where the answer was larger than 1K. And there we go. So if you see top domain is irlwinning.com, then we have fk.com. IC.org still is kind of active. We have a pointer, probably an ARPA address, and we have .dot. And if you look at that now to actually see what the names and query types of that were, oh, that's probably 10 minutes, that's not enough. Oh, we have okay. So you see most of them are still using any, just because you can get as much stuff in there as possible. The PTR probably not get left over. And if we look at what these domains are now, I'm just going to try this one. You see it's around 4,000 bytes, and that's kind of, this domain was clearly set up only to do an amplification attack. There's nothing else you can do with it. I mean, I haven't tried TCP connecting, but there probably won't be anything listening to that. And if you look at the other domain, was the top one? This one. It's roughly the same. So one of the things that we didn't see here, and then I'm going to now probably scroll back. This pointer record also kind of was brought to my attention, and if we do that, okay. So that's 12K. Now this isn't an issue with most server implementations because the implementers seem to be sensible and limit the output they give with UDP to around 4K. Most of them, some implementations allow larger packets, but most of them don't. So that will switch to TCP and make the attack basically not doable anyway. But maybe put a pointer record for every possible name that might hit that or might be live at that IP in the DNS is not a good idea. So 12K packets for a simple pointer to me seems just too much. And another interesting domain I saw that actually got me scratching my head a lot was where, oh, we don't have it. Oh, it doesn't appear anymore. So okay, it doesn't appear in that sample, so I'm going to show it to you. So there's a domain called netfirms.com, and if you do something like netfirms.com, that's pretty much a normal A record, not a big thing. Now, if you do something like garbage, you get 4,000 bytes back. And this is pretty much for every garbage for that domain you do, and that's why we see this in the text, because that's probably a misconfiguration or a software that is wrong. I've tried to contact them, I haven't got anything back from them, so if somebody knows these guys, please tell them to fix their servers, because anything you do that, you simply get back these 4,000 domains. And this is ideal because that is exactly at the point where you're still using UDP and not switching to TCP. So that's, and I call these dual use domains because they have a legitimate purpose, but well, they also have things an attacker can use. So that's, okay, let's go back to the presentation, if I can manage to find my mouse. Okay, so that's basically what we've done to detect this stuff, and I think the last pages are just, so what can we do about this? Well, we have to do some way of filtering, because we don't want to actually be the cannon or the ISPs, or don't want to be the cannon to kind of shoot someone down. But it's not like RL where you can say, well, basically for that customer I'm just going to deny him now to basically query me with that record or with other records. So we have to be careful of what we do there. at the moment still most of the stuff that you can do, but I'll guess that will change, is filter or put rate limitings if you can on any. But as said, this will probably change in the future, because once attackers detect that their attack is no more effective, they go away or they change the attack. I mean, what we've seen when we work with our customers, as soon as you kind of block a domain or NX domain a domain, they notice that and they go away. They might come back with another domain the next day, but the attackers seem to actually also monitor how effective their attacks are. And I mean, other stuff has been said before. What can we do? Well, we have to maybe do reputation lists. We have to maybe filter on them, and we have to get people to, I mean, truncate. We don't see, I mean, dropping the packet at the ISP level as a, if you are a resolver to end clients, is not as bad as dropping the packet on the authoritative server. It's still bad, so we should do truncate, because these attacks, and there has been some word confusion. Some people describe them as reflection attacks. The attackers are not interested, in my point of view, in reflection. They're interested in amplification. If you send them the same, if you give them the same traffic back and forth, they will go away. They're only interested to actually, well, if you give them large packet back. And one thing that I hope, and that there was a talk on DNS Org that was on Sunday on kind of TCP. So I hope that if we do that truncating, that stop resolvers will speak TCP and do the right thing. And I know that this has been an issue with some DNSSEC rollouts, where we had lots of gateways that didn't understand TCP for DNS. I hope that because of the DNSSEC rollout that this has been changed a bit, but I don't know yet. So, and this is just how we in our server basically block that. This is blocking any attacks for a dot and ripe.net. Oh, and the dot attack also is pretty interesting, because while the actual dot, if you look at it, just going to go back here. Where is my mouse? There it is. So if you do dig .any, it's 1,600 bytes, so it's not that much. But keep in mind, the actual packet that you need is just 45 bytes. So it's the smallest possible DNS packet that you can have, and that's still a good amplification factor. So now I need to find my mouse again. Yeah, and it's all about size. So maybe if we can find ways in name server software to actually do something, or to handle stuff differently, if we receive or have answers of a certain size, then we might have been able to automate this. I'm not sure. I mean, that's something that we are looking into at the moment. But and the thing that we don't need to miscount is attackers will change when we are basically doing defenses against these attacks. And yeah, I think the rest is pretty much the examples you had. These are other stuff that we are root. Okay, so what I think we should do, we should really try to do some rate limiting. At the moment, if we have that on names or name and FQDN, or some reputation lists, even kind of sending back NX domain if you don't have the ability to do rate limiting yet, might be a good idea. But you only have to do that for names where you are sure this is something that is bad. So if it's something you don't want to actually send back NX domain for IC.org or ripe.net or something like that. But if you are sure it's something bad, then maybe sending back NX domain, if your resolver only supports that, might be a good idea. And as said, maybe we should really rate limiting based on answer size, and that's something that we are looking into, and maybe I can talk to you about that later or in a couple of years. So that was all I have. Thank you. Questions?
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. It sounds like an escalation of sides. We know that open resolvers are the problem, can't deal with the open resolvers, so we're going to come up with rate limiting. And then the botnets are going to come up with another way of doing it. And then we're going to fix that problem, and then they're going to come up with another way of getting around it. Wow, this sounds like the spam problem we've been having for 20 years. At the end of the day, the open resolvers are the problems. At the end of the day, that is the root. And the fact that we can still buy DSL routers today that are open resolvers by default. A large company just recalled 15 million power bars from 15 years ago. Maybe it's time that we deal with this as a hazard, like a fire, and start making these companies have to eat these modems.
I fully agree with you, but the thing is, you need something like 30K packets to actually fill up a gig, and most people haven't connected their DNS server yet with 10 gig. So even kind of as a matter of self-defense, you have to do something, because a couple of attackers could easily kind of make your DNS server unavailable. So, I mean, while I'll agree we have to do something about the root cause, I think there's no way on getting around kind of basically measurements to defend against these attacks now.
Henry Sullivan, Dime. Did I just hear you say that the recursives ought to be answering NX domain for things that they think are bad?
The thing with the ideal would be truncate, but not all software currently that's out there supports setting truncate on an answer if it's kind of a rate limiting. So that's purely a sort of stopgap measure. If you are 100% sure that what you are seeing here is not a legitimate kind of query. That's not it's not that I'm saying that we should answer NX domain. It's just we have to defend the attack if the attack basically brings my name server to a grinding halt. Resolver.
But if your name server, I mean, if what you're saying is I have 100% certainty that this is not a real query. Like, I don't know about you, but I have never had 100% certainty about anything on the internet, leaving that aside. Then just don't answer it. I mean, if you really have that kind of certainty, you just wouldn't answer. I recognize that there's a potential cache poisoning problem there too, but that's a little...
No, well, for the resolver, there's probably not the cache poisoning, but there's the problem. It's my customer that is asking that question. So...
Well, no, I mean, either this is 100% certain that it's not a legitimate query, or you need to answer it. And if you need to answer it, then NX domain is the wrong answer. You can't just lie. Yeah. First of all, assuming DNS sec, which of course is going to make this entire problem worse, right, so you can surf fail. There's a suggestion.
Yeah, okay. Surf fail. I mean, as said, the stuff that you saw there would drop the stuff. So we also tried that and did work.
Jeff Houston, if you're under attack as a name server, why don't you just simply mirror back the queries with TC equals 1?
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting.
All of them. Just I'm under attack here, just go to TCP. As we've found, it's not that bad.
Yeah, that was the suggestion I was making. The best way to defend against attack, if you are sure you have the attack, then send back TC1. And if somebody behind that really wants that answer, it will try with TCP and get the answer. I totally agree.
Brian Nixon, sorry, thanks. Excuse me. The question about being able to filter at the network level, I think if you look at where the residential open resolvers proxies are, you could probably put filters closer to them on inbound traffic on port 53 as a destination that would prevent any of the open resolver proxies from ever seeing those packets. And that would go a long way to solving the issue without having anything else change.
Well, but that would mean that my customers can't run name servers or...
No, I mean, sorry, yes, you couldn't run name servers. No, sorry, you couldn't run resolvers.
How do you make the distinction?
If you are serving answers that are coming at you on port 53 from the outside world, that's either as an open resolver or as a authority server.
Yeah, but I said, how do you make the distinction? I mean, what filter list should I look basically if the RD bit is set?
If you have residential customers running authority servers, you may have some, but if you don't separate those out on some way on your infrastructure, then you can't fight that problem at the network level. Yes, I agree, but I think it's not a reasonable approach to not try and do that.
No, but
That's just my opinion.
yeah, but you have to. I mean, separating them out is an issue, but then you have to probably change all your acceptable use policy or what have you.
If it's only limited to UDP, the people who operate servers over TCP, over that same infrastructure, would not be impacted.
But DNS tries over UDP first, and if it doesn't get an answer back, it won't try over TCP. It has to get the TC1. So, I mean, it is. I mean, that has been suggested, but I think that if people want to do that, they have to do some precise kind of looking into the issue on kind of their SLAs or whatever acceptable use policies before they do that. So,
Right, but we're not saying that it wouldn't work. We're just saying it falls into the policy domain.
yeah.
Any more questions?